For thousands of years, one river quietly shaped one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. The Nile. Long before great cities filled the horizon, before towering pyramids touched the sky, before the names of mighty pharaohs echoed through history, the river was already here, patient, reliable, bringing life across an endless desert. Tonight, we are not following kings. We are not chasing battles. Instead, we will simply live among the ordinary people of ancient Egypt. We will wake with them, work beside them, share their meals, walk through their villages, watch the sun rise over the Nile, and slowly drift into one of the most fascinating worlds ever created. So, find a comfortable position, allow your breathing to slow, and together, let us travel back. More than 5,000 years. Before there was Egypt, there was desert. Miles upon miles of golden sand stretched toward every horizon. Rain was rare. The earth was dry. Life was difficult. Yet cutting through all of it, like a ribbon of deep blue silk, flowed the Nile. Every year, almost as faithfully as the changing seasons, the river overflowed its banks. The floodwaters spread across the land, covering fields with rich black mud. When the waters slowly disappeared, they left behind some of the most fertile soil anywhere on earth. To the ancient Egyptians, this was no accident. It was a gift. The river fed their crops, filled their wells, carried their boats, connected distant villages. Without the Nile, ancient Egypt could never have existed. Every home, every temple, every loaf of bread, every pyramid, every story, all began with this river. As dawn approached, mist drifted gently above the water. The first birds called across the reeds. Fishing boats rested quietly along muddy banks, waiting for another day. Families slowly awoke inside simple homes built from sun-dried mud bricks. The air was still cool. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes. Mothers prepared the first meal of the day. Fathers stepped outside, looking toward the river that would decide how their lives unfolded. Unlike today, very few people owned clocks. The rising sun was enough. Life followed nature. Morning, noon, evening, the seasons, the flood, the harvest. Everything moved according to rhythms far older than any calendar. The villages themselves were surprisingly peaceful. Narrow dirt paths wound between modest homes. Palm trees provided welcome shade. Goats wandered freely. Geese searched for scraps. Cats watched silently from walls warmed by yesterday's sunlight. You would hear laughter, the splash of water, the distant sound of wooden oars, the grinding of grain, the soft conversations of neighbors who had known one another their entire lives. Most people would never travel far from the village where they were born. Their world was small. Yet within that small world, life was rich with routine, family, work, and quiet traditions passed from one generation to the next. The houses were simple, but thoughtfully designed. Mud bricks kept the interiors cool during the scorching afternoons. Flat roofs became extra living space, especially during warm evenings. Small windows allowed fresh air inside while protecting families from the intense desert heat. Furniture was limited. A few stools, low tables, simple woven mats. Storage jars lined the walls, carefully holding precious grain, oil, and water. Nothing was wasted. Everything had value. Even broken pottery often found a second purpose. Life demanded practicality. Outside, the Nile never truly rested. Boats drifted steadily north, their square sails catching gentle winds. Others moved south, their crews rowing against the current. The river served as Egypt's greatest highway. It carried merchants, stone, food, messages, ideas. Without roads stretching across the desert, the Nile connected an entire civilization. Every journey eventually returned to its waters. As the morning grew brighter, fields slowly came alive. Farmers walked toward their crops carrying simple wooden tools. Others guided oxen through soft earth. Children helped gather vegetables. Women carried water jars balanced gracefully upon their heads. The day had only just begun. Yet everyone already understood their place within the rhythm of village life. No one hurried. There was work to do, but there was also an acceptance that nature set the pace, not people. Far beyond the villages, hidden beneath the morning haze, stood temples whose stone walls would outlive countless generations. Great monuments were beginning to rise. Some would become the pyramids we still admire today. But those wonders belong to another story. For now, our attention remains here. Among ordinary families, living quiet lives beside an extraordinary river. Because before history remembers emperors, it is ordinary people who build civilizations. And tomorrow, as the Nile rises once again, we will step inside one of these homes to discover what everyday family life in ancient Egypt truly felt like. Home along the Nile. Morning sunlight slowly spilled across the rooftops. The village had fully awakened. Smoke curled gently from cooking fires. Children laughed somewhere beyond the narrow streets. A donkey brayed in the distance. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the warm air. Life had begun once again. Unlike the enormous stone temples that survived for thousands of years, ordinary Egyptian homes were never built to last forever. They were made from simple mud bricks, clay, water, straw, mixed together by hand, pressed into wooden molds, then left beneath the hot Egyptian sun until they hardened. Stone was far too valuable for everyday houses. Mud was everywhere. So mud became home. From the outside, most houses appeared plain. Flat roofs, smooth walls, very few windows, no colorful decorations, no grand entrances. But inside, they offered something incredibly important: relief from the heat. The thick mud walls acted like natural insulation. During the hottest afternoons, the rooms remained surprisingly cool. Even today, similar buildings can still keep interiors comfortable without electricity. The ancient Egyptians understood their environment remarkably well. As you stepped through the doorway, your eyes would slowly adjust to the softer light. The rooms felt calm, simple, peaceful. Furniture was limited. A wooden stool. A low table. Perhaps a woven basket tucked neatly into one corner. There were no wardrobes. No shelves filled with possessions. Most families owned only what they truly needed. And somehow, their homes rarely felt empty. Instead, they felt purposeful. Every object earned its place. Storage jars lined the walls. Some held grain. Others stored dried beans, lentils, oil, or beer. Water was especially precious. Large clay jars helped keep it cool throughout the day. Without refrigerators, clever pottery became one of the family's greatest tools. The thick clay slowly allowed tiny amounts of water to evaporate, cooling the contents inside. It was simple, quiet, remarkably effective. The kitchen looked very different from those we know today. There were no ovens built into walls, no metal stoves, no gas flames. Cooking often happened over small clay ovens or open fires. Bread baked slowly upon heated surfaces. Porridge simmered gently inside pottery bowls. Vegetables softened over glowing embers. The smell of onions, garlic, fresh herbs, and warm bread often filled the entire home. Cooking was not rushed. It followed the same slow rhythm as everything else in Egyptian life. Most meals were surprisingly modest. Bread remained the center of nearly every table. Alongside it came vegetables, beans, dates, figs, fish from the Nile, and occasionally meat during special occasions. Beer accompanied many meals, though it was quite different from modern beer. It was thick, nutritious, almost closer to liquid bread than the drink many imagine today. Children often drank it as well, because clean water was not always guaranteed. Family life unfolded together. Parents, grandparents, children, and relatives often shared the same home or lived only a few steps apart. Meals became moments of conversation, stories, advice, laughter. Children learned simply by watching adults work. There were very few written instructions. Life itself was the classroom. As afternoon approached, the heat outside became almost overwhelming. Many people retreated indoors. Others found shade beneath palm trees. Work slowed. Voices softened. Animals rested. Even the river seemed quieter beneath the brilliant Egyptian sun. The entire village paused, almost as though the land itself were taking a slow breath. When evening finally arrived, everything changed. Cool air drifted in from the Nile. Families climbed onto their flat rooftops. These rooftops were more than roofs. They became living rooms beneath the open sky. People talked, shared food, watched children play, looked toward countless stars shining above the silent desert. Without electric lights, the heavens appeared astonishingly bright. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness. Constellations slowly crossed the night. Many believed the stars carried deep spiritual meaning. Perhaps they did. Or perhaps, after a long day beside the Nile, they simply offered comfort. As oil lamps flickered softly, one by one, the village grew quiet. Doors closed. Conversations faded. Only insects, gentle river water, and distant animal calls remained. Tomorrow, the sun would rise once more. Bread would bake again. Fields would need tending. Life would continue exactly as it had for generations. But before we leave these peaceful homes, there is one place we have not yet visited. Beyond the village, stretching across rich black soil, lay the fields that fed an entire civilization. And that is where our journey continues next. The fields that fed Egypt. As the first rays of sunlight reached the fertile banks of the Nile, the fields slowly came alive. This was where the true wealth of ancient Egypt was created. Not inside palaces, not within temples, but here, where countless ordinary people worked quietly beneath the rising sun. To the ancient Egyptians, the year was divided into 3 great seasons: the season of flood, the season of growth, and the season of harvest. Every family understood this rhythm. Every child grew up watching it. Every harvest depended upon it. The river decided everything. During the annual flood, the Nile overflowed its banks, spreading across the countryside like a vast shimmering lake. At first glance, it appeared destructive. Fields disappeared beneath muddy water. Paths vanished. Villages became isolated. But no one feared it. This flood was life itself. As the waters slowly retreated, they left behind rich black soil unlike anything the desert could offer. Soft, dark, filled with nutrients. The Egyptians even gave this fertile land a special name: Kemet, the Black Land. Beyond it stretched the endless desert. The Red Land, where almost nothing could grow. Between these two worlds, an entire civilization flourished. When the waters finally withdrew, work began immediately. Farmers stepped into the damp earth carrying simple wooden plows. Oxen pulled steadily through the fields. Seeds were scattered by hand. Children followed behind, gently covering them with soil. Everything depended upon timing. Plant too early, and the flood might wash everything away. Plant too late, and crops would not mature before the next season arrived. Experience mattered more than written instructions. The land itself became the teacher. The most important crop was wheat, closely followed by barley. Together, they became the foundation of Egyptian life. Bread, beer, both began here. Beneath the open sky, rows of onions, lettuce, beans, peas, and flax also covered the fields. Flax would later become linen, the fabric worn throughout Egypt. Even clothing began in these quiet fields. Farming was not easy. The Egyptian sun could be relentless. By midday, the heat often became overwhelming. Workers wrapped linen around their heads. Many wore very little clothing, allowing every breeze to cool their skin. They paused only briefly. The seasons waited for no one. Birds quickly discovered freshly planted fields. Children chased them away, laughing as flocks lifted suddenly into the bright morning sky. Sometimes simple scarecrows stood silently among the crops. Other times, families simply watched over the fields themselves. Every grain mattered. A poor harvest could bring hunger. A good harvest meant security for another year. Water remained the greatest challenge. although the Nile flowed nearby. Not every field touched its banks. To solve this, the Egyptians developed ingenious methods of irrigation. Canals carried water into distant farmland. Small earth walls directed its flow. Later, simple lifting devices helped raise river water into higher channels. None of it required electricity. Only patience, ingenuity, and generations of observation. Animals played their own quiet roles. Oxen pulled heavy loads. Donkeys carried baskets. Geese wandered freely between fields. Cats hunted mice that threatened precious grain stores. Even the smallest creature had a place within village life. Nothing existed in isolation. Everything depended upon everything else. As the crops slowly ripened, the landscape changed. Fields that had once appeared dark and muddy became oceans of golden wheat, stretching toward the horizon. The harvest season arrived. Families worked together. Men cut stalks using curved sickles fitted with sharp stone blades. Women gathered bundles. Children collected fallen grain from the ground. Nothing was wasted. Not even a single handful. Nearby, workers separated grain from the stalks. Oxen walked slowly across harvested bundles, loosening the precious kernels. Others tossed grain into the air using wooden forks. The wind carried away the lighter chaff, allowing the heavier grain to fall back into waiting baskets. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Nature itself helped complete the harvest. Once stored, the grain became more than food. It became security, trade, taxes, power. The strength of ancient Egypt rested upon full granaries. Without successful harvests, there could be no temples, no armies, no pyramids. Every magnificent achievement began with ordinary farmers working patiently beside the Nile. As evening approached, the fields slowly emptied. Workers walked home carrying tools worn smooth by years of use. The golden light of sunset spread across the river. Birds returned to the reeds. Another day's work had quietly come to an end. Yet beyond these peaceful fields, another remarkable profession was beginning its own daily routine. Men whose hands did not sow seeds, but instead shaped stone, wood, gold, and papyrus into wonders that still survive today. Tomorrow, we leave the farms behind and step into the workshops of ancient Egypt's skilled craftsmen. Craftsmen, merchants, and the builders of Egypt. Long before the great heat of midday settled across the Nile, another part of the village had already become busy. Not the fields, not the river, but the workshops. This was where skilled hands quietly transformed ordinary materials into extraordinary objects. Every village depended upon its craftsmen. Without them, there were no homes, no furniture, no tools, no boats, no temples, no statues, no jewelry. Their work surrounded every Egyptian, even if their names have long been forgotten. The carpenter began his morning surrounded by the scent of fresh wood. Egypt itself had very few forests. Good timber was precious. Acacia trees, sycamore fig, and imported cedar from Lebanon were all carefully valued. Every piece of wood was used wisely. Nothing was wasted. Broken furniture became smaller tools. Offcuts became handles. Even the smallest scraps found another purpose. With bronze chisels, wooden mallets, and remarkable patience, the carpenter shaped stools, beds, doors, boats, and elegant chests for storing clothing and jewelry. Many designs were surprisingly graceful, simple, yet beautiful. Even today, their craftsmanship feels timeless. Nearby, the potter sat quietly beside a spinning wheel. His hands moved with astonishing confidence. A lump of wet clay slowly rose beneath his fingers. A bowl appeared, then a jar, then another. Each one looked effortless. But behind every movement were years of practice. Pottery filled every Egyptian home. Water jars, storage vessels, cooking pots, oil lamps. Without pottery, daily life would have been almost impossible. Once shaped, the vessels dried beneath the warm Egyptian sun. Later, they entered clay kilns, where intense heat transformed soft earth into strong ceramic. Many would survive thousands of years, waiting patiently beneath desert sands until modern archaeologists uncovered them once again. The blacksmith's workshop echoed with a different rhythm. Metal struck metal. Bronze glowed orange inside small furnaces. Hammer blows rang through the village. Although iron would become common much later, bronze remained one of Egypt's greatest achievements. Axes, knives, chisels, needles, sickles. Every tool passed through skilled hands before reaching the farmer, builder, or merchant. Goldsmiths occupied an entirely different world. Gold fascinated the Egyptians, not simply because it was valuable, but because it reminded them of the eternal sun. Necklaces, bracelets, rings, crowns, tiny amulets shaped like sacred animals. Every piece reflected astonishing precision. Many were so delicate that modern jewelers still admire their workmanship. Perhaps the most respected craftsmen of all were the scribes. Unlike most Egyptians, scribes could read and write. This single skill transformed their lives. While farmers labored beneath the sun, scribes worked in shaded buildings, carefully recording harvests, taxes, laws, letters, and royal orders. They wrote upon papyrus, made from reeds growing beside the Nile. Brush in hand, they quietly preserved an entire civilization. Without them, much of ancient Egypt would have disappeared forever. The marketplace slowly filled as morning continued. Merchants arranged baskets overflowing with onions, figs, dates, fish, bread, linen, pottery, and colorful beads. People greeted one another warmly. News traveled through conversation long before written announcements. The market was not simply a place to buy food. It was where the village gathered. Friendships grew. Stories spread. Children played between the stalls. Life unfolded naturally. Trade reached far beyond Egypt itself. Ships carried goods along the Nile. Caravans crossed difficult deserts. Exotic products slowly arrived from distant lands. Ivory, incense, fine timber, copper, precious stones. In return, Egypt exported grain, papyrus, linen, and beautifully crafted goods. The world was already connected, even thousands of years ago, only much more slowly. Among all these workers, there was one remarkable truth. Very few imagined they were creating history. The carpenter simply built a chair. The potter simply shaped another jar. The scribe simply recorded another shipment of grain. The merchant simply opened another stall. Yet together, their quiet routines built one of humanity's greatest civilizations. History, after all, is rarely created by famous people alone. It is built, day after day, by countless ordinary hands. As the afternoon light softened, the workshops gradually grew quieter. Tools were carefully stored. Finished pieces rested neatly upon shelves. Merchants counted their remaining goods. Children returned home. Another peaceful day slowly came to its close. Yet above every village, above every market, above every field, stood magnificent temples where priests prepared for ceremonies that connected earth with the heavens. And that is where our journey continues next. Food and daily meals in ancient Egypt. As the first golden light spread across the Nile, another familiar sound filled the village. Not the voices of merchants, not the calls of fishermen, but the steady rhythm of stone against stone. A gentle, repeating sound, almost like quiet breathing. Women sat beside heavy grinding stones, slowly turning grain into flour. Morning had begun, and breakfast was already being prepared. Bread was far more than food. It was the foundation of Egyptian life. Nearly every family, whether rich or poor, began and ended the day with bread. Without it, life beside the Nile would have been almost unimaginable. Every harvest, every field, every storage jar eventually became another loaf waiting patiently beside a warm fire. Making bread required patience. First, wheat or barley was carefully cleaned. Small stones, bits of straw, and loose husks were removed by hand. The grain was then poured onto a large flat grinding stone. Another rounded stone rested above it. Back and forth. Again. And again. Sometimes for hours. Slowly, the hard grains became soft flour. The work demanded strength. Yet it also brought quiet moments of conversation. Neighbors talked. Children listened. Stories passed naturally from one generation to the next. The fresh flour was mixed with water. Sometimes a little salt. Sometimes herbs. The dough rested briefly before being shaped into small round loaves. Clay ovens, heated long before sunrise, waited patiently nearby. The smell that filled the village was unmistakable. Warm bread, fresh from the oven, soft inside, golden outside. Even thousands of years later, it remains one of the world's most comforting aromas. Not every loaf looked the same. Some were round, others long and narrow. Special celebrations brought decorative shapes. Certain breads included dates, figs, or fragrant spices. Even ordinary meals carried small touches of creativity. Food was practical, but it was never without care. Alongside bread stood another surprising companion. Beer. To modern ears, serving beer with breakfast may sound unusual. Yet Egyptian beer was very different from today's version. It contained less alcohol. It was thick, cloudy, and nutritious. Made from barley and bread, it provided energy throughout long working days. Adults drank it. Children often drank a lighter version as well. Clean drinking water could not always be guaranteed, but carefully brewed beer was generally much safer. Breakfast itself remained simple. Fresh bread, beer, perhaps onions, dates, or a handful of figs picked from nearby trees. Some families enjoyed soft cheese. Others added vegetables from their gardens. The meal was never extravagant. It did not need to be. The coming day's work required steady nourishment, not luxury. By midday, the village grew quieter. The Egyptian sun now stood high overhead, its warmth pressing gently upon the earth. Farmers rested beneath trees. Craftsmen paused inside shaded workshops. Children searched for cooler places to play. Lunch often arrived in woven baskets. Flatbread, beans, lentils, garlic, cucumber, perhaps dried fish wrapped carefully inside linen cloth. Meals were shared, rarely rushed. Conversation remained just as important as the food itself. The Nile generously supplied another essential part of the Egyptian diet: fish, tilapia, catfish, perch. Fishermen pushed their small wooden boats quietly through calm morning waters. Some cast woven nets. Others used simple hooks. Many had learned these skills from fathers, who had learned them from grandfathers before them. Every successful catch meant another family would eat well that evening. Meat appeared much less frequently. Cattle, sheep, and goats represented considerable wealth. Most families reserved meat for festivals, religious celebrations, or especially joyful occasions. When guests arrived, or important ceremonies took place, a roasted goose or duck might grace the table. Such meals became treasured memories, spoken of long after the last bite had disappeared. Fruit added welcome sweetness to everyday life. Dates hung heavily from graceful palm trees. Figs ripened beneath the warm sun. Grapes grew in carefully tended gardens. Pomegranates, when available, offered brilliant color and refreshing flavor. Children eagerly waited for harvest season, just as children still do today. Some things changed very little. Keeping food fresh required considerable ingenuity. Without ice, without refrigeration, without electricity, large clay jars stored grains safely for months. Cool underground rooms protected vegetables from the intense heat. Fish were dried beneath the desert sun. Others were salted for longer storage. Every household understood that careful preparation today meant security tomorrow. Nothing was wasted carelessly. Too much depended upon every harvest. As evening approached, the village slowly gathered once more. Families sat together. Fresh bread rested upon low wooden tables. Small oil lamps flickered gently against mud brick walls. Parents spoke quietly about the day's work. Children eagerly shared small adventures. Outside, the Nile reflected the final colors of sunset. Inside, simple meals became something much greater. They became moments of belonging, of gratitude, of home. Perhaps that is why the Egyptians placed bread, beer, fruit, and other familiar foods inside many tombs. They hoped their loved ones would never know hunger, even in the next life. The meals that sustained them in this world, they believed, should continue forever. As the final crumbs disappeared, the lamps burned a little lower. The stars slowly emerged above the silent river. Tomorrow, before sunrise, the grinding stones would begin their gentle rhythm once again. Bread would bake. Beer would be poured. Families would gather. Life beside the Nile would quietly continue, just as it had for countless generations. And with the morning, our journey will carry us toward the great temples, where priests welcomed another day beneath the watchful eyes of Egypt's gods. Bread, beer, and the village bakery. Before the rest of the village had fully awakened, one building was already alive with quiet activity. It was not a temple. It was not a workshop. It was the village bakery. Long before sunrise, small fires glowed softly inside clay ovens. Their warmth slowly spread through the cool morning air. The smell of baking bread drifted gently through narrow streets, reaching sleeping homes one by one. For many Egyptians, this familiar scent became the first greeting of every new day. The baker's work began while most people still slept. Large baskets of flour stood ready nearby. Water waited inside cool clay jars. Wood crackled softly beneath the ovens. Every movement followed a routine practiced thousands of times before. Nothing felt hurried. Everything happened almost like a quiet morning ritual. The dough itself seemed almost alive. Mixed by strong hands, it stretched, folded, and rested. Some loaves were small enough for one person. Others were prepared for entire families. A few received dates, herbs, or sweet honey before entering the oven. Special occasions deserved special bread. Ordinary mornings asked only for warmth and nourishment. Children often appeared first, barefoot, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. They waited patiently near the doorway. Sometimes they carried small woven baskets, sometimes only a piece of cloth. The baker smiled. Fresh loaves were handed over, still warm enough to fill the chilly morning air with gentle steam. The walk home never lasted long. The wonderful smell made waiting almost impossible. Bread rarely reached the table alone. Beside it stood bowls of beans, onions, fresh herbs, or soft cheese. Sometimes families dipped warm bread into olive oil. Other mornings, they spread sweet honey across its surface. Simple meals, yet deeply satisfying. Food was never judged by luxury, only by whether it brought comfort, strength, and enough energy for another day's work. Nearby, another familiar activity quietly continued: beer brewing. Unlike the loud taverns imagined today, Egyptian brewing resembled careful cooking. Large clay vessels stood quietly inside cool rooms. Barley soaked gently in water. Partially baked bread was broken apart and mixed into the liquid. Time did the rest. Slow fermentation transformed simple ingredients into a nourishing drink that every household recognized. The finished beer looked nothing like the clear drinks of today. It remained cloudy, thick, filled with tiny grains. Some visitors from distant lands might have found it unusual. The Egyptians found it perfectly ordinary. For them, beer was not a luxury. It was simply another form of food. Every household developed its own small traditions. Some preferred stronger flavors, others sweeter ones. Neighbors occasionally exchanged recipes, just as families still do today. One household became known for especially soft bread, another for excellent beer. The village quietly remembered these things. As the morning grew brighter, the bakery slowly emptied. Its shelves no longer held warm loaves. Instead, they now rested inside homes throughout the village. Breakfast tables filled with quiet conversation. Parents discussed the coming day. Children laughed. Outside, the Nile reflected the growing sunlight. Another ordinary morning had begun. And like so many mornings before it, it began with bread, warm from the oven, shared among people who believed that simple meals, shared together, were among life's greatest blessings. Tomorrow, our footsteps finally leave the comforting smell of fresh bread behind, and carry us toward Egypt's magnificent temples, where another kind of daily ritual quietly awaited the rising sun. Temples, priests, and the gods of ancient Egypt. As the village finished its morning meal, another day quietly began inside Egypt's temples. The streets outside were already busy. Farmers walked toward the fields. Boats drifted onto the Nile. Children chased one another through narrow paths. But behind enormous stone walls, life followed a very different rhythm. A slower rhythm. A quieter rhythm. One that had remained almost unchanged for centuries. Unlike ordinary homes, the temples were built to last. Massive blocks of limestone stood firmly beneath the Egyptian sun. Towering gateways welcomed the first light of morning. Great columns rose like forests of carved stone, their surfaces covered with painted scenes of gods, kings, birds, flowers, and sacred symbols. Every wall told a story. Every doorway carried meaning. Nothing had been placed there by accident. As dawn arrived, the great wooden doors slowly opened. Not for crowds, not for visitors, but for the priests. The temple still felt cool inside. The thick stone walls protected it from the growing heat outside. Only the soft glow of oil lamps illuminated the long halls. The air carried the gentle fragrance of incense. Everything felt peaceful, almost timeless. To the ancient Egyptians, their gods were not distant beings watching from another world. They believed the gods truly lived inside these sacred spaces. The statues hidden deep within the temple were not simply works of art. They represented living divine presence. Because of this, the first responsibility of every priest was remarkably personal. They greeted the god. The doors of the inner shrine were carefully opened. Fresh water washed the sacred statue. Soft linen replaced yesterday's garments. Beautiful necklaces and jewelry were gently arranged. Perfumed oils filled the small chamber with sweet fragrance. Fresh bread, fruit, flowers, and beer were placed before the god. Each action was performed slowly, carefully, respectfully. There was no audience, only devotion. Outside, ordinary Egyptians rarely witnessed these ceremonies. Most people remained in the outer courtyards. The deepest chambers belonged only to priests. Yet everyone understood that these quiet rituals helped maintain harmony throughout Egypt. If the gods were honored, the Nile would continue flooding. The crops would continue growing. Life would remain balanced. At least, that is what many sincerely believed. One of the most important gods was Ra, the great sun god. Every sunrise reminded the Egyptians of his daily victory. Each evening, they believed Ra sailed into the dangerous underworld, where darkness tried to destroy him. Every dawn proved he had succeeded once again. Light returned. Life continued. The rising sun became more than sunrise. It became hope itself. Another beloved goddess was Isis. She represented motherhood, protection, and healing. Families quietly prayed to her during difficult times. Mothers asked for healthy children. Travelers requested safe journeys. The sick hoped for recovery. Her kindness became woven into countless ordinary lives. She was not simply worshipped. She was trusted. The falcon-headed Horus watched over kings. Thoth, often shown with the head of an ibis, protected wisdom and writing. Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian, guided souls into the next world. Even today, their names remain familiar, long after the temples themselves have grown silent. Animals often walked freely through temple grounds. Cats rested peacefully beneath columns warmed by the morning sun. Sacred birds wandered through shaded gardens. Pools reflected lotus flowers floating gently upon still water. The temples were not gloomy places. They felt alive, filled with birdsong, running water, and the quiet footsteps of priests moving from one sacred task to another. Several times each year, the peaceful silence transformed into celebration. Great festivals filled the streets. Priests carried beautifully decorated statues upon wooden platforms. Musicians played drums, harps, and flutes. Children watched with wide eyes. Families gathered beside roads lined with flowers. The gods, who normally remained hidden, briefly traveled among the people. It became a day of joy, gratitude, and shared celebration. As afternoon slowly faded, the temple returned to its gentle silence. The final offerings were placed before the shrines. Incense rose one last time. The priests quietly closed the great wooden doors. Tomorrow, before sunrise, they would open them once again. Exactly as they had yesterday. Exactly as they would for generations still to come. Outside, the Nile continued flowing peacefully toward the sea. The fields waited for tomorrow's farmers. The baker prepared tomorrow's bread. Children drifted gently toward sleep. Life beside the river never truly stopped. It simply moved forward, one quiet day after another. And tomorrow, we leave the peaceful temples behind, to step aboard the wooden boats that carried an entire civilization along the timeless waters of the Nile. Temples, priests, and the gods of ancient Egypt. As the first warmth of morning spread across the Nile, another group of Egyptians quietly began their day. Not in the fields, not inside workshops, but within the cool stone walls of Egypt's temples. Long before the first visitor arrived, the priests were already awake. To the ancient Egyptians, their gods were not distant beings watching from the sky. They believed the gods lived among them, within rivers, within the sun, within the fertile soil, within the winds that crossed the desert. Every part of nature carried divine meaning. Life itself was sacred. The temple stood unlike any other buildings. Massive stone gateways welcomed the rising sun. Tall columns stretched toward painted ceilings. Their walls were covered with carved stories. Kings offered gifts to the gods. Priests performed sacred ceremonies. The Nile flowed endlessly through carefully carved symbols. Every stone seemed alive with meaning. Yet surprisingly, most ordinary Egyptians rarely entered the deepest parts of these temples. The innermost chambers remained quiet, dark, and reserved for priests alone. There, small statues of the gods rested inside beautifully decorated shrines. Each morning, the priests carefully opened these sacred rooms, not with excitement, but with deep respect. The first task was simple: wake the god. The statue was gently uncovered. Fresh water cleansed it. Beautiful linen garments replaced yesterday's clothing. Jewelry decorated the figure. Perfumed oils filled the air. Fresh bread, fruit, beer, flowers, and incense became the morning offering. To modern eyes, it might appear symbolic. To the Egyptians, it was entirely real. The gods deserved care, comfort, and daily attention. Outside, the village continued its ordinary routine. Children chased one another between homes. Farmers tended fields. Merchants welcomed customers. Yet above every conversation, the towering temple quietly reminded everyone that unseen powers watched over their lives. Faith was not reserved for special occasions. It was woven into every ordinary day. Perhaps no god was more important than Ra, the great sun god. Each sunrise became a victory. Every morning, Ra was believed to sail across the heavens in his magnificent solar boat. Each evening, he descended into the underworld, where he battled the forces of darkness throughout the night. When dawn finally arrived once again, it meant Ra had won. Light had defeated darkness. Order had overcome chaos. Another day had been given to humanity. The Nile itself possessed sacred meaning. Its yearly flood appeared almost miraculous. Without it, Egypt would simply become desert. Many believed the river carried divine blessings. Each overflowing season reminded people that the gods still cared for the land. Gratitude became part of everyday life. Animals also held special significance. Cats were admired for protecting grain stores from mice. The ibis represented wisdom. The falcon symbolized divine kingship. The crocodile inspired both fear and respect. Even humble beetles rolling small balls across the earth reminded people of creation itself. Nothing seemed ordinary. Everything reflected a deeper mystery. Festivals brought entire communities together. Music echoed through village streets. Priests carried sacred statues during colorful processions. Families gathered beneath banners and flowers. Food was shared generously. Songs filled the warm evening air. Children laughed. Neighbors embraced. For a little while, daily work paused, allowing everyone to celebrate together. These joyful days reminded people that life contained not only labor, but also gratitude. As the sun slowly descended, temple shadows stretched across the ground. Incense drifted upward in thin white ribbons. The final prayers of the day echoed softly between ancient stone columns. Oil lamps replaced sunlight. The great doors slowly closed. Tomorrow, the rituals would begin again. Exactly as they had yesterday. Exactly as they would for generations. Steady. Unchanging. Comforting. Far beyond the peaceful temples. However, another remarkable project was quietly unfolding. Thousands of skilled workers were gathering beside enormous blocks of stone. The world would one day call them wonders. But for the people building them, they were simply another day's work. Tomorrow, we leave the temples behind and walk toward the greatest construction project in human history. The pyramids. The builders of the pyramids. As dawn slowly illuminated the desert, its first golden light reached enormous blocks of limestone waiting patiently beneath the open sky. The air was still cool. Workers gathered quietly. Tools were checked. Ropes were untangled. Simple breakfasts were shared before another day of labor began. Far in the distance, the Nile shimmered peacefully, reminding everyone why these remarkable projects were even possible. Today, the pyramids seem almost impossible. Gigantic monuments standing silently against the desert for more than 4,000 years. Many people still wonder how they were built. Some imagine lost civilizations. Others imagine mysterious forces. But the true story is perhaps even more remarkable. It was ordinary human determination. Patient. Organized. Relentless. Contrary to an old belief. Most pyramid builders were not slaves. Modern archaeological discoveries tell a different story. Many were skilled workers. Craftsmen. Stone cutters. Engineers. Carpenters. Boat builders. Laborers who worked in carefully organized teams. Some came only during the Nile flood, when their own farms rested beneath water. Instead of waiting idly, they joined one of history's greatest construction projects. Entire villages grew beside the building sites. Simple houses sheltered thousands of workers. Large kitchens baked enormous quantities of bread every single day. Fish arrived from the Nile. Cattle supplied meat. Beer flowed generously. Doctors treated injuries. Bakers, potters, carpenters, and cooks all became just as important as the men moving stone. Building a pyramid required an entire community. Each morning, the quarry echoed with the sharp sound of bronze chisels striking limestone. Workers carefully cut enormous blocks from the rock. Wooden sledges waited nearby. Thick ropes were wrapped around each stone. Dozens of men pulled together. Not hurriedly. Not chaotically. But steadily. Almost rhythmically. To reduce friction. Water was poured across the sand before the sledges. The damp surface allowed the heavy stones to slide far more easily. It was a remarkably clever solution. Simple. Effective. The desert itself became part of the engineering. Some blocks weighed several tons. Yet slowly, inch by inch, they moved. No single person could accomplish such work alone. Success depended entirely upon teamwork. Everyone pulled together. Quite literally. Nearby, master builders carefully measured every angle, every line, every corner. The pyramids were not assembled randomly. Their precision continues to astonish engineers today. Many align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. Achieving such accuracy without modern instruments required extraordinary knowledge and patience. As the structure slowly rose, ramps carried stones ever higher. Historians continue debating exactly how these ramps looked: straight, curved, spiraling. Perhaps different methods were used at different stages. The complete answer may never be known. Yet, regardless of the exact design, one truth remains certain. The pyramids rose gradually, stone after stone, year after year, never in haste, always with remarkable organization. The workers were not anonymous. Many proudly named their teams. Some groups called themselves the Friends of Khufu. Others became the Drunkards of Menkor. Their names, written upon hidden stones, still survive today. Tiny reminders that these magnificent monuments were built by real people with humor, friendships, and ordinary lives. When evening finally arrived, the day's labor ended. The workers returned to their homes. Dust covered their clothing. Their muscles ached. Families waited with warm food. Children greeted tired fathers. Conversations filled the cool evening air. Tomorrow, the stones would still be waiting. The pyramid would continue growing. Slowly. Patiently. Exactly as great achievements always do. Many centuries later, travelers from distant lands would stand before these enormous monuments and wonder: who built them? How? Why? Yet the builders themselves probably asked a much simpler question each morning: what needs to be done today? Perhaps that quiet dedication, rather than the finished pyramid itself, was their greatest achievement. As darkness slowly settled across the desert, the unfinished pyramid stood quietly beneath countless stars. A monument still growing, a dream still becoming reality. Tomorrow, we leave the great construction sites behind and step inside another fascinating part of Egyptian life. We will discover how people dressed, how they cared for their appearance, and why beauty held such deep meaning beside the Nile. Boats, travel, and life on the Nile. Long before roads stretched across great nations, before trains, before horses pulled heavy wagons across distant lands, ancient Egypt already possessed something far more valuable: a river. Not just any river, but one that flowed for thousands of kilometers, quietly connecting nearly every village, every temple, every marketplace, and every city. The Nile was more than water. It was Egypt's greatest road. As dawn spread across the eastern sky, The river slowly awakened. Mist hovered gently above its surface. Tiny ripples shimmered beneath the first rays of sunlight. Birds emerged from the reeds, their calls echoing across the calm water. The entire world seemed to move slowly, almost reluctantly, as another peaceful morning began. Small wooden boats rested beside muddy river banks. Some belonged to fishermen. Others carried merchants. A few waited to transport farmers, travelers, or priests to villages farther downstream. Every boat had a purpose. Every journey began with the Nile. Boat builders were highly respected craftsmen, using simple bronze tools. They carefully shaped wooden planks into graceful vessels. Acacia wood often formed the smaller boats. For larger ships, precious cedar imported from distant Lebanon was sometimes used. Every plank was fitted carefully. Every rope tightened by hand. A well-built boat could serve a family for many years. Some boats carried square linen sails. When the wind blew from the north, the sails filled gently, pushing the boats southward against the river's current. Returning north required almost no effort at all. The current itself carried the vessel downstream. The Nile and the wind worked together, making travel surprisingly efficient. Nature quietly became Egypt's greatest engineer. Fishing boats left first. Their crews knew the river intimately. They understood where fish gathered, which reeds sheltered young fish, which deeper channels offered larger catches. Standing carefully upon narrow boats, they cast woven nets into the still water. Moments later, the nets returned glittering with silver fish dancing beneath the morning light. Another day's food had arrived. Children often watched from the shore. Some dreamed of joining their fathers one day. Others simply skipped stones across the calm surface, laughing whenever one bounced farther than expected. The river belonged to everyone, young and old alike. Nearly every Egyptian carried childhood memories of the Nile. As the morning continued, merchant boats slowly appeared. Clay jars filled with grain, bundles of fresh linen, baskets overflowing with onions, dates, and figs, pottery carefully wrapped in woven cloth. Everything moved by water. Transporting heavy goods by boat required far less effort than dragging them across hot desert sand. The Nile quietly made trade possible. Sometimes travelers boarded small ferries. There were no bridges crossing much of the river. Instead, simple boats carried people from one bank to the other. Farmers greeted neighbors. Merchants exchanged news. Children pointed excitedly toward birds flying overhead. Even short journeys became opportunities for conversation. Life moved slowly enough for strangers to become friends. The river itself was astonishingly alive. Tall papyrus reeds swayed gently beside the banks. White lotus flowers floated peacefully upon quiet pools. Bright kingfishers flashed across the water like tiny blue arrows. Herons stood motionless, waiting patiently for fish. Everything seemed balanced. Everything belonged. Not every creature inspired comfort. Crocodiles also called the Nile home. Silent, powerful, nearly invisible beneath the water. Most villagers respected them deeply. Children learned early never to wander too close to certain stretches of riverbank. The Nile provided life, but it also demanded caution. The Egyptians accepted both. Even larger than crocodiles were the hippopotamuses. Today they may appear almost comical. Yet ancient Egyptians knew how dangerous they could become. A frightened hippopotamus could easily overturn a small boat. Farmers protected their fields carefully whenever these enormous animals wandered nearby. Still, the river belonged to them as much as anyone else. Humans simply shared it. As afternoon sunlight softened, the Nile became quieter once more. Boats returned home carrying fish, goods, and tired travelers. The gentle splash of wooden oars echoed across the water. Palm trees reflected upon the calm surface. The day's work slowly came to an end. Then came sunset. Perhaps the most beautiful moment of all. The western sky glowed with deep gold, orange, and crimson. The river transformed into liquid fire, reflecting every color above. For a few peaceful minutes, everything seemed perfectly still. The fishermen paused. Birds settled into the reeds. Even the breeze became gentler. The Nile simply flowed onward, as it always had. Tomorrow, before sunrise, the boats would once again leave the shore. Children would wave goodbye. Merchants would begin another journey. Fishermen would cast their nets. Life beside the river would continue. Steady, patient, unchanging. Because in ancient Egypt, the Nile was never merely a river. It was the heartbeat of an entire civilization. And tomorrow, we leave its peaceful waters behind, to discover how the people of ancient Egypt dressed, adorned themselves, and found beauty beneath the endless desert sun. Clothing, beauty, and everyday comfort. As the morning sun climbed steadily above the Nile, its warmth spread quickly across the villages. By midday, the Egyptian landscape could become remarkably hot. The people who lived here understood something very well. Comfort was not a luxury. It was a necessity. Unlike many civilizations that wore heavy wool, the ancient Egyptians preferred linen. Light, soft, cool against the skin. Linen came from the flax plants growing beside the fertile banks of the Nile. Months before becoming clothing, those delicate blue flowers had quietly swayed in village fields. Harvested by careful hands, the plants were dried, their fibers separated, then spun into fine thread. Patiently, women sat beside wooden looms, weaving long strips of cloth. Hour after hour, day after day, each thread crossing another, until simple fibers slowly became beautiful fabric. Most ordinary people dressed very simply. Men often wore short linen kilts tied comfortably around the waist. Women usually wore long linen dresses that allowed the breeze to pass easily through the fabric. Children, especially the youngest, often wore very little clothing during Egypt's hottest months. There was no embarrassment, only practicality. The climate shaped everyday life. Wealthier Egyptians enjoyed finer linen. Some garments were almost astonishingly thin, smooth enough to feel nearly weightless, beautifully pleated, carefully washed, meticulously folded. Even today, museum visitors often marvel that cloth thousands of years old still survives. Footwear was surprisingly uncommon. Most people simply walked barefoot. The warm earth beneath their feet was familiar, comfortable. Sandals were reserved for longer journeys, important ceremonies, or wealthier families. Made from leather, woven reeds, or palm fibers, they protected feet from scorching sand and rough stones. Yet inside the village, bare feet remained perfectly ordinary. Jewelry held special meaning, not only for beauty, but for protection. Simple necklaces decorated with colorful beads appeared everywhere. Bracelets circled wrists. Small rings caught the morning sunlight. Many people wore tiny amulets carved into meaningful shapes. The Eye of Horus, the scarab beetle, the ankh. Each symbol quietly carried hopes for health, good fortune, or protection from harm. Beauty and belief often lived side by side. Perhaps one of ancient Egypt's greatest surprises is how much people cared for personal cleanliness. Despite the surrounding desert, washing formed part of everyday life. Many people bathed regularly. Clean water from the Nile, combined with natural oils, helped remove dust collected throughout the day. Freshness mattered, especially beneath the relentless Egyptian sun. Perfumes filled homes with gentle fragrance. Sweet oils scented the skin. Lotus flowers, myrrh, frankincense, and other natural ingredients created delicate perfumes admired throughout the ancient world. Some wealthy Egyptians even placed small cones of scented wax upon their heads during celebrations. As the day grew warmer, the wax slowly melted, releasing pleasant fragrances into the air. It must have seemed almost magical. Eye makeup became another familiar part of daily life. Both women and men often darken their eyes using finely ground minerals. To modern eyes, it appears decorative. Yet it served another purpose as well. Many believed it reduced the bright glare of the desert sun. Some ingredients may even have helped protect against eye infections. Beauty and practicality once again worked together. Hair received similar attention. Some Egyptians carefully braided their natural hair. Others shaved their heads completely. Especially during the hottest months. Elegant wigs, crafted from human hair or plant fibers, became surprisingly fashionable. These wigs remained cooler, cleaner, and easier to maintain than long natural hair beneath the desert heat. To modern visitors, the practice may seem unusual. To the Egyptians, it made perfect sense. Children watched carefully as adults prepared each morning, learning not through lessons, but through observation. One day, they too would weave linen, apply perfume, fasten jewelry, wrap simple garments around their waists. Daily routines quietly passed from one generation to the next, almost without anyone noticing. As evening approached, families returned home. Dust from another day's work settled upon clothing. Linen garments were carefully folded, jewelry removed. Oil lamps glowed softly inside peaceful homes. Outside, the last golden light reflected gently across the Nile. Tomorrow, fresh linen would once again flutter in the warm breeze. Children would run barefoot through narrow village paths. The scent of flowers, perfume, and warm bread would drift quietly through the evening air. Life continued. Simple, comfortable, beautiful in ways that rarely appear inside history books. Yet there remained one part of Egyptian life that brought endless joy to every generation. Not work, not temples, not even the Great Pyramids. Tomorrow, we spend a day with Egypt's children, discovering how they learned, played, laughed, and slowly grew into the next generation beside the timeless waters of the Nile. Childhood along the Nile. Long before the first rays of sunlight reached the rooftops, the youngest members of the village were already awake. Some stretched sleepily upon woven mats. Others followed the familiar smell of warm bread. A few hurried outside, barefoot and smiling, eager to begin another ordinary day. Childhood in ancient Egypt was remarkably different from childhood today. There were no classrooms filled with rows of desks, no ringing school bells, no homework waiting at the end of the day. Instead, children learned by living. Every moment became a lesson. Every chore became practice. Every conversation became education. The youngest children spent most of their time close to home. They followed their mothers through the village. They watched bread being baked, water being carried, clothes being woven, meals being prepared. Without realizing it, they slowly memorized the routines that would one day become their own. Boys often accompanied their fathers. One day they might walk through wheat fields. The next, they might watch fishermen cast their nets into the Nile. Some observed carpenters shaping wood. Others watched merchants bargain in the marketplace. No one rushed their learning. Knowledge arrived little by little, season after season, year after year. Girls learned equally valuable skills. They helped spin flax into thread, prepared vegetables, cared for younger brothers and sisters, watched older women weave beautiful linen upon wooden looms. These were not simply chores. They were the foundations of everyday life, skills that kept families strong. Yet childhood was not only about responsibility. It was also filled with laughter. Children invented games using almost anything they could find. Smooth stones became game pieces. Sticks became imaginary boats. Palm leaves became toys. A simple ball woven from reeds could entertain an entire afternoon. Happiness rarely depended upon expensive possessions. Imagination supplied everything else. Some children enjoyed wrestling matches with friends. Others practiced throwing small sticks toward targets drawn in the sand. Running races through village paths became another favorite pastime. Laughter echoed between mud brick homes, while parents quietly smiled from nearby doorways. Across thousands of years, the sounds of children at play have changed very little. Many families also kept small pets. Cats wandered freely through homes, often becoming beloved companions. Dogs guarded courtyards. Young goats sometimes followed children almost like playful friends. Animals formed part of everyday family life. Not simply working creatures, but familiar faces within the household. Not every child followed the same path. A small number, usually from wealthier families, received formal education from scribes. These children learned to read hieroglyphs, to write carefully upon papyrus, to solve mathematical problems. Their lessons demanded extraordinary patience. Some ancient writing exercises still survive today. One even reminds students, do not be lazy. Some advice, it seems, never grows old. For most children, however, their classroom remained the village itself. The river taught them when to fish. The fields taught them when to plant. The stars helped them understand the passing seasons. Every ordinary day quietly prepared them for adulthood. There was no sharp line between childhood and growing up. One slowly became the other. As evening approached, families gathered once again. Children listened while grandparents told stories. Some tales spoke of clever animals. Others described brave gods. Many explained why the Nile flooded each year, or how the stars appeared in the heavens. Long before books became common, stories carry knowledge from one generation to the next. Every family became a living library. Eventually, one by one, small eyes grew heavy. Oil lamps flickered softly against mud brick walls. Parents spread woven sleeping mats. The cool evening breeze drifted gently through open doorways. Outside, the Nile continued its endless journey toward the sea, just as it had long before these children were born, and just as it would long after they were gone. Tomorrow, they would wake once again to another peaceful day beside the river. But growing older also brought new responsibilities. Life was not always easy. Illness sometimes arrived without warning. Injuries happened. People searched for healing wherever they could find it. Tomorrow, we visit the remarkable world of ancient Egyptian medicine, where careful observation, natural remedies, and quiet faith work together in ways that still surprise historians today. Medicine, healing, and the search for good health. As another peaceful morning arrived beside the Nile, life unfolded just as it always had. Farmers walked toward their fields. Children chased one another through dusty streets. Boats drifted quietly along the river. Yet even within this peaceful world, illness sometimes appeared without warning. A fever, a broken bone, an infected wound, a painful tooth. For the people of ancient Egypt, good health was never taken for granted. Remarkably, the ancient Egyptians became some of the earliest physicians in recorded history. Long before modern hospitals, they carefully observed the human body. They recorded symptoms, tested treatments, passed medical knowledge from one generation to the next. Some of their surviving medical texts continue to surprise doctors even today. When someone became ill, the healer arrived carrying experience rather than complicated equipment. There were no thermometers, no X-rays, no laboratories. Instead, the physician listened carefully, examined the patient, observed breathing, checked wounds, asked questions. Careful observation often became the most valuable tool of all. Many treatments came directly from nature. Honey covered cuts and wounds. Modern science now knows that honey naturally helps fight certain bacteria. The Egyptians had discovered this through centuries of experience, not through microscopes. Simply by paying attention. Garlic appeared frequently in their remedies. So did onions, mint, juniper, coriander, figs, dates, willow. Hundreds of different plants found their way into ancient medicines. Some proved surprisingly effective. Others probably offered little more than hope. Yet every remedy reflected generations of careful experimentation. Bandages wrapped injured limbs. Splints supported broken bones. Simple surgical tools treated wounds. Doctors stitched cuts using thread made from natural fibers. They understood that clean wounds often healed more successfully than dirty ones. Even without modern knowledge of bacteria, they recognized the importance of cleanliness. Observation remained their greatest teacher. Dentistry proved much more difficult. Bread often contained tiny grains of sand from the grinding stones used to make flour. Over many years, this slowly wore away tooth enamel. Many Egyptians suffered painful dental problems throughout their lives. Healers attempted treatments using herbs, ointments, and careful cleaning. Yet severe toothaches remained an unfortunate part of everyday life. Not every illness could be explained through observation alone. Many Egyptians believed sickness sometimes came from unseen spiritual forces. Because of this, medicine and religion often worked together. A physician might prescribe herbs. A priest might offer prayers. An amulet might be worn for protection. To modern minds, these approaches seem separate. To the Egyptians, they simply belonged together. Healing involved both body and spirit. Women also possessed remarkable medical knowledge. Midwives guided countless births. Mothers learned which herbs soothed fevers. Grandmothers remembered remedies passed down through generations. Much of Egypt's practical medicine quietly lived inside ordinary homes rather than grand temples. Experience traveled through families, one conversation at a time. The greatest dream of every healer remained surprisingly simple: relief. To ease pain. To stop bleeding. To help someone sleep comfortably. To allow another sunrise beside the Nile. Medicine has changed enormously across thousands of years. Yet those hopes remain exactly the same today. Perhaps that is what makes these ancient physicians feel strangely familiar. They did not know about viruses. They had never seen bacteria. They could not perform modern surgery. Yet they cared deeply for the people before them. They observed patiently. They learned constantly. They tried. Sometimes, that effort alone brought comfort. As evening settled across the village, the physician returned home. Another wound had been cleaned. Another fever carefully watched. Another family reassured. Outside, oil lamps flickered gently. The stars slowly appeared above the quiet river. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new mysteries, new opportunities to learn. Life, like the Nile, never truly stopped flowing. And while ordinary people rested peacefully in their homes, far beyond the villages, one family prepared for a journey unlike any other. A journey they believed continued beyond death itself. Tomorrow, we explore one of ancient Egypt's most fascinating beliefs: their extraordinary vision of the afterlife, and the remarkable process that created the mummies which continue to captivate the world today. The journey beyond life. As evening slowly settled across the Nile, the village became quiet once more. Cooking fires glowed softly. Families gathered together. Children listened to familiar stories. Above them, countless stars appeared one by one. stretching endlessly across the Egyptian sky. To many ancient Egyptians, those stars were not simply distant lights. They were reminders. Life did not end with death. It merely changed. Unlike many civilizations, the Egyptians devoted enormous care to preparing for the next world. To them, death was not a frightening ending. It was the beginning of another journey. A journey that required planning, patience, and hope. Much like life itself, they believed every person possessed several spiritual parts. One was called the Ka. It represented the life force. Another, the Ba, was often imagined as a bird with a human head, able to travel freely between worlds. If these parts reunited successfully, the individual could continue living forever in the afterlife, but only if the body remained recognizable. This belief gave rise to one of history's most remarkable traditions: mummification. When someone passed away, special embalmers quietly began their careful work. This was not rushed. It was treated with deep respect. The body was gently washed. Prayers were spoken. Family members mourned nearby. Everything happened with remarkable patience. The internal organs were carefully removed, because they would decay first. The liver, the lungs, the stomach, the intestines. Each was preserved separately inside beautifully carved containers known today as canopic jars. Only the heart usually remained, for the Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, held a person's thoughts, memories, and character. It would be needed in the next world. The brain, by contrast, was considered far less important. It was carefully removed and discarded. To modern minds, this seems astonishing. Yet every civilization understands the human body differently. The Egyptians simply interpreted it through the knowledge available to them. Next came natron, a naturally occurring salt found within Egypt. The body rested beneath this drying mixture for many weeks. Slowly, all moisture disappeared. Without moisture, decay slowed dramatically. Nature itself became part of the preservation process. Once completely dried, the body was wrapped carefully in long strips of linen, layer after layer. Sometimes hundreds of meters of cloth surrounded a single person. Between the folds, small protective amulets were placed. Each carried special meaning: health, protection, safe passage, eternal life. Every layer became another quiet prayer. Meanwhile, artists prepared beautiful coffins. Bright colors covered wooden surfaces. Hieroglyphs described the person's name, their family, their hopes, their prayers. Many coffins displayed peaceful, smiling faces, not because death was ignored, but because it was believed another life waited beyond it. When everything was ready, family members gathered for a final farewell. Food, flowers, incense, music, tears, memories. The deceased was placed inside carefully prepared tombs, surrounded by objects that might prove useful beyond death: furniture, clothing, jewelry, tools, even favorite games. The Egyptians hoped their loved ones would continue living comfortably forever. One of the most important beliefs involved the Hall of Judgment. There, the heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of truth. If the heart remained light, free from great wrongdoing, the soul continued peacefully into eternal life. If not, its journey ended. The story reminded everyone of something surprisingly familiar. Live honestly. Treat others fairly. Speak truthfully. Even across 4,000 years, those lessons still feel timeless. As the stars slowly crossed the night sky, the tomb fell silent. Outside, the Nile continued flowing exactly as it always had. Villages woke. Children laughed. Bread baked. Fields flourished. Life moved forward, generation after generation. While deep beneath the desert, countless Egyptians rested peacefully, waiting for the eternity they believed would one day arrive. Today, their monuments still stand. Their stories still survive. Their hopes, their fears, their daily routines, and their remarkable civilization continue to inspire people across the world. And perhaps that is the greatest form of immortality, to be remembered long after the final sunset has faded. Thank you for joining this gentle journey through ancient Egypt. May your evening be peaceful. May your dreams be calm. And may tomorrow greet you as gently as the sunrise once greeted the quiet waters of the Nile. Good night.